"This is no place for curious people. Get out now," shouted Dr. Cesar, without even looking up. Lucia felt the sharp blow of humiliation, but maintained her composure, as she had learned from her mother. In that hospital, no one could imagine who she really was. The third-floor corridor breathed disinfectant and silence. 6:15 in the morning. Lucia walked slowly, her leather shoes whispering against the cold floor. She stopped in front of the wall, where a thin crack snaked through the plaster, exactly where she had predicted in the original design 15 years ago. Her fingers touched the surface. Her navy blazer contrasted with the paleness of the walls. She tilted her head, studying the barely perceptible unevenness in the ceiling. Her eyes moved like those of an architect inspecting his own work. "Visits only with authorization from reception, madam." The voice cut through the air like a blade. Dr. Cesar Martinez emerged from the office, his lab coat impeccable, his stethoscope hanging around his neck like a trophy. His eyes raked Lucia up and down, her frizzy hair tied in a bun, the absence of any visible identification, her skin that didn't belong in this sterile environment. "This area is restricted," he continued, his tone rising an octave. "Are you lost?" The word "ma'am" dripped like acid. It wasn't politeness, it was territorial demarcation. Lucia took a deep breath. The hospital smell transported her. Mom cleaning these same hallways on Sundays, her calloused hands proudly holding the bucket. "One day, daughter, this floor will know our footsteps as owners, not servants." She lifted her chin, her spine straightened, as if bearing an invisible ancestral crown. "Interesting," Lucia murmured, her voice as calm as still water. "How the doors here look like cages, don't you think, doctor?" Cesar frowned. It wasn't the answer he expected. He expected submission, apologies, a retreat. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Oh, but who knows?" she replied, her lips curving into a half-smile. The silence that followed weighed like molten lead. Lucia remained motionless, her eyes fixed on his, as a single truth echoed in the thin air. Some cages are built by the prisoners themselves. Lucia didn't move for 3 full seconds. Time stood still in the icy corridor. Her breath was the only living thing in that white silence. Her fingers slowly closed at her sides, not in angry fists, but in anchoring, like someone holding an invisible rope connecting her to something greater. She took 2 steps back, her heels echoing against the floor like heartbeats. It wasn't a retreat. It was a strategic repositioning. Her shoulders remained straight, her head held high, as if she were wearing a crown only she could see. The fluorescent light in the hallway cast harsh shadows on her face. A young nurse hurried past, looked away, and pretended not to have witnessed anything. Dr. Cesar watched her with that smile that didn't reach his eyes. The kind of smile she'd known since she was a child. The same one from the bank manager when Mom was trying to open her first account. The same one from the principal of the private school where she'd gotten a scholarship. It was the smile of forced tolerance. Of, let's be polite, but you know your place. He adjusted his stethoscope, a performative gesture of authority. 2 residents emerged from a nearby room, curious about the tension in the air. One of them whispered something to the other. Muffled chuckles. The young nurse stopped at the end of the hallway, pretending to organize a clipboard, but her ears perked up. Grandmother Conceison's voice echoed in her mind. "Daughter, when they try to diminish you, remember that you carry the sweat of those who came before. Every humiliation you endure standing upright is a victory they cannot touch." Lucia felt the weight of generations on her shoulders. How many black women had been expelled from that same hallway? How many had bowed their heads and walked away in silence? But she wasn't just Lucia. She was the granddaughter of the woman who scrubbed those floors, dreaming of better days. She was the daughter of the man who carried brick by brick in the construction of that building. She was the living memory of those who never got to enter through the front door. "Dr. Cesar," she said, her voice soft as velvet, yet firm as concrete. "Thank you for the welcome." There was no apparent irony in the tone, but the words carried something he couldn't decipher, a quiet power that disturbed him. "You're welcome," he replied uncomfortably. "I hope you find what you're looking for." Down there. The pause before "down there" was calculated. One last nudge. Lucia just smiled. A smile that said, "You have no idea what I'm looking for." She turned and began walking, each step echoing like a silent promise that this wouldn't be the last time he heard her name in those halls. The hallway transformed into a silent stage. Lucia stood in the center, like a bronze sculpture amidst the white marble. The air conditioning whispered overhead, creating a chilly soundtrack for the unfolding spectacle. Nurse Patricia hid a smile behind her hand, her eyes shining with contained mischief. She leaned over to her colleague next to her, whispering something that made both of them quickly lower their gazes. The two residents, Marcus and Raphael, exchanged that knowing look that says, "You saw that too, right?" At the reception desk, Sylvia hesitated between continuing to type or calling security. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard, paralyzed between indifference and action. Security guard Ronaldo appeared at the end of the hallway, walking slowly, as if unwilling to assume the role assigned to him. He was a 50-year-old black man, in an impeccable navy blue uniform, a radio crackling on his chest. His eyes met Lucia's for a split second. There was an apology in that look. He knew the script: a black woman in the wrong place, a call to security, a discreet removal. He'd performed this play dozens of times before. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said, his voice low, almost embarrassed. "I need to check your access authorization." Dr. Cesar watched the scene with barely concealed satisfaction. He crossed his arms and leaned against the wall, like someone watching a movie and already knowing the ending. Lucia looked at Ronaldo and saw in him a reflection of her own father. How many times did Dad have to choose between his job and his dignity? How many times did he bow his head to keep his family fed? She didn't judge Ronaldo. She understood the invisible weight he carried on his shoulders, the fear of being the next to be questioned, the next to be put in his rightful place. But today was different. Today she wasn't there as a visitor. She was there as the woman who signed the paychecks, who approved the budgets, who decided who stayed and who went. The irony was bitter like coffee without sugar. "Of course, Ronaldo," Lucia replied, looking him straight in the eye. "But you know you don't need to apologize for your work." The sentence took everyone by surprise. She knew his name. She was speaking to him as a person, not as an obstacle. Ronaldo blinked twice, disconcerted. This wasn't how these situations usually unfolded. He began, but the words were lost in the thin air. "Do your job," she continued, her voice gentle but firm. "We're all just doing our jobs here." The silence that followed was unlike any other. It wasn't one of embarrassment or victory, but of mutual recognition between two people who understood perfectly the cruel game they were being forced to play. If you've ever witnessed something like this, share it in the comments. Sometimes, just knowing we're not alone changes everything. Lucia was 8 years old when she first sat in the back of her father's old pickup truck. The smell of fresh cement mixed with honest sweat hung in the Saturday morning air. Her skinny little legs dangled from the back of the truck, her worn sneakers barely touching the dirt floor. Before him rose a skeleton of concrete and iron, the future San Vicente Hospital. Yellow machines roared like mechanical dinosaurs. Men in helmets shouted instructions that were lost in the noise of the jackhammers. Antonio Silva, his father, wiped the sweat from his forehead with his plaid shirt. His calloused hands pointed to the structure that grew larger day by day. "Look closely, Lucia," he said, his voice hoarse with pride. "Every brick in this place is made with the sweat of our family." That same Saturday, an imported car pulled up at the construction site entrance. A man in a suit, the engineer in charge, got out, accompanied by a blonde woman in high heels who stepped carefully through the mud puddles. "Where's the manager?" the man asked, completely ignoring Antonio, who was right next to him. Antonio swallowed hard and pointed to a white man who was talking to other workers. The girl Lucia watched everything in silence. She saw her father being treated like furniture. She saw how his presence became invisible in front of those with diplomas and surnames. But he also saw something else. Antonio didn't lower his head. He kept working, each hammer a silent declaration that he belonged there as much as anyone. That afternoon, Lucia made a silent promise to herself and to her father, who didn't know he was being watched. One day, she would return to that place. Not through the back door, not asking permission, not invisible. She would return as owner. Her mother, Conceição, arrived late in the afternoon, bringing a hot lunch for her husband. She hugged her daughter, still covered in cement, and whispered in her ear, "Daddy is building your future, daughter. Every brick he lays today is a step for you to climb tomorrow." "Dad?" Lucia asked, still in the back of the truck, watching the construction work. "Why didn't that man talk to you?" Antonio stopped putting away his tools. He looked at his daughter with those tired yet hopeful eyes. "Because he hasn't learned to see yet," he replied simply. "But you'll teach him, won't you, daughter?" Lucia nodded, not fully understanding the weight of those words. "Promise, I promise, Dad." 27 years later, standing in that same hallway her father helped build brick by brick, Lucia finally understood that some promises take a lifetime to fulfill, but never lose their power. Dr. Cesar approached with measured steps, his Italian leather shoes echoing against the floor like a metronome of arrogance. His blue eyes raked Lucia from head to toe again, this time more lingeringly, more brazenly. The smile that appeared on his lips was the kind that never warmed, cold as a surgical scalpel. He stopped less than a meter away from her, deliberately invading her personal space. The expensive perfume he wore couldn't mask the acrid scent of supremacy. He crossed his arms over his chest, letting the stethoscope swing like a hypnotic pendulum. The fluorescent light cast harsh shadows on his angular face, accentuating his predatory smile. 2 inmates approached, drawn to the spectacle like vultures to the scent of carrion. "Need help finding your way back, ma'am?" The question came out slowly, each word dripping like poisoned honey. "I know it's easy to get confused in places like this." He paused theatrically, savoring the moment. "This sector is restricted to qualified people." Another pause. Longer. The word qualified came out of his mouth as if it were something sacred, untouchable. His eyes gleamed with refined cruelty, the kind of violence that wears a tie and diploma as armor. Dr. Felipe, one of the interns, chuckled softly. Dr. Amanda, the other, looked away, but didn't move away, complicit in their silence. Nurse Patricia pretended to organize papers, but her ears were tuned to the humiliation of others like someone listening to music. Lucia felt a familiar wave of anger rise in her chest, hot as lava. It was the same feeling she'd had when she was 16, and her chemistry teacher doubted she'd created the perfect experiment on her own. The same feeling she'd had when the bank denied her first business loan, despite her impeccable project. But along with the anger came something more powerful, her father's voice echoing through the years. "Lucia, when they try to make you small, remember that you carry the strength of someone who never dreamed. Every no you transform into a yes is an ancestral victory." She took a deep breath. The air conditioning whispered overhead like the wind in Grandma Conceição's hair, whispering strength into her veins. "Dr. Cesar," she said, her voice maintaining the preternatural calm that irritated men like him. "You're right. This place does require qualifications." She let the word hang in the air like a time bomb about to explode. "And do you feel qualified?" he continued, tilting his head slightly, as if asking a genuinely curious question. The question caught him off guard. He was supposed to be asking the questions, imposing the rules, defining who belonged and who didn't. Of course," he stammered, his smile finally cracking. The silence that followed carried a different tension. For the first time that morning, Cesar Martinez wasn't sure who was truly in control of the situation. The sound cut through the air like a silent siren. First a sharp beep, then the metallic voice of the internal public address system echoing off the hospital's white walls. The speaker, discreetly installed in the ceiling, crackled twice before speaking. "Director Lucia Silva, we request your presence in the executive suite. Director Lucia Silva, executive suite in 2 minutes." The world stopped. The air conditioning continued to hum, but everything else froze like a photograph. Dr. Cesar's eyes widened slowly, like someone watching a horror movie and seeing the monster appear on the screen. Nurse Patricia dropped the pen she was holding. The sound of it hitting the floor echoed like a gunshot in the deathly silence that filled the hallway. Dr. Felipe, the intern who had chuckled moments before, swallowed hard. His laughter died in his throat like a bird trying to fly and falling. "Doctor," Amanda, who had looked away out of embarrassment, now fixed her gaze on Lucia with a mixture of shock and horror. Security guard Ronaldo, who was still there awaiting instructions, slowly lowered the radio he'd raised to call for backup. His eyes met Lucia's, and for the first time that morning, there was something resembling relief on his face. Caesar opened and closed his mouth 3 times, like a fish out of water gasping for air. All his arrogance, all his unshakable certainty of superiority, crumbled before his eyes like a sandcastle at high tide. "Principal," he whispered, his voice cracking like broken glass. Lucia felt an ancestral calm wash over her. It was as if all the women in her lineage were there, invisible, whispering in her ear. Grandma Conceição, who cleaned offices dreaming of executive granddaughters. Mother Teresa, who saved every penny to pay for her daughter's college tuition. All the humiliations, all the doors slammed in her face, all the no's. She turned into fuel over the years, every night studying until dawn, every meeting where she was the only black person, every time she had to prove she deserved to be there. Everything led to this moment, to this corridor, to this silence, heavy as gold. Lucia adjusted her blazer as naturally as someone adjusting a crown. Her movements were slow, deliberate, filled with a dignity that isn't learned. It's inherited. "Well," she said, her voice soft as velvet but sharp as a blade, "it seems I have a meeting." She began walking towards the elevators, each step echoing like the beat of a heart that had finally found its rhythm. He stopped halfway, turned to Caesar with a smile that wasn't one of victory. It was one of compassion. "Dr. Caesar, whenever you want to talk about hospital humanization, my office is always open." And so, without haste, without drama, without shouting or theatrics, Lucia Silva transformed a hospital corridor into the stage for the most silent and devastating lesson in humility those white walls had ever witnessed. The elevator arrived with a soft ding that echoed like a church bell in the sepulchral silence of the hallway. The brushed steel doors opened slowly, reflecting distorted fragments of everyone present, like a shattered mirror multiplying the tension into 1,000 pieces. Lucia stopped before the open doors, but didn't enter immediately. She turned slowly, the movement fluid like an ancient dance. Her eyes scanned every face in the hallway. Caesar with his skin as pale as paper, Patricia with her mouth half open, Felipe and Amanda glued to the wall like crooked paintings. The elevator light created a golden halo around her silhouette, transforming her into an almost ethereal figure against the cold, clinical backdrop of the hospital. "Dr. Caesar," she said, her voice cutting through the air like a sharp blade wrapped in velvet. "Whenever you want to discuss humanization in healthcare, my office is open, always." The words fell like raindrops on dry ground, each syllable absorbed by the awkward silence that filled the room. Caesar tried to respond, but the words stuck in his throat like thorns. He, who always had ready answers, always knew how to put people in their place, was now as mute as a pillar of salt. Dr. Felipe lowered his eyes to the floor, as if the floor had suddenly become fascinating. Dr. Amanda leaned back against the wall, trying to become invisible. Nurse Patricia let out a soft sigh. It wasn't relief, it was the sound of someone who had just witnessed a silent earthquake. Lucia felt the weight of all generations on her shoulders. It wasn't just her there. It was her grandmother Conceição who never set foot in a boardroom. It was her mother Teresa who cleaned offices dreaming of executive daughters. It was every black woman who had to swallow humiliation so she could be there. This wasn't a moment for revenge. It was one of politeness. A silent lesson in what happens when arrogance meets the competence you've always underestimated. Ronaldo, the security guard, approached slowly. When he reached Lucia, he did something no one expected. He took off his cap and bowed slightly. "Excuse me, Director," he said, his voice thick with respect that came from far deeper than corporate protocol. "Have a good meeting." Lucia smiled at him. It wasn't condescension. It was recognition between two people who knew the weight of carrying dignity in spaces not made for them. "Thank you, Ronaldo. And thank you for doing your job so professionally." The elevator doors closed softly, but the echo of the lesson hung in the air like a lingering perfume. Sometimes the greatest revolution happens in the silence between an arrogant question and a dignified answer. What about you? What would you do if you witnessed a scene like this? Would you remain silent or take a stand? Share in the comments. Your voice matters. The 10th floor conference room exuded a hushed power. A polished mahogany table reflected the LED lights embedded in the ceiling. 8 black leather chairs were arranged like thrones around the mirrored surface. Through the panoramic windows, the city stretched out like a carpet of concrete and dreams. Lucia entered and found 5 board members already seated. Dr. Roberto Mendez, clinical director, stood immediately. Dr. Ana Paula Ferreira, head of nursing, did the same. Everyone stood with respect that contrasted sharply with the scene in the hallway 20 minutes earlier. The air conditioning hummed softly, but the atmosphere was charged with a different tension, not embarrassment, but anticipation. The door opened again. Caesar entered slowly, as if walking to his own judgment. His hands trembled almost imperceptibly. A private earthquake felt only by him. Dr. Cesar Martinez, Dr. Roberto said, his voice formal as court protocol. The board has requested your presence to discuss the new hospital humanization protocol that Director Silva will implement. Cesar swallowed. Lucia sat at the head of the table, her hands folded on the polished surface. There was no triumph in her eyes, only a calm determination that was more frightening than any scream. "Please sit down," she said, indicating the chair farthest from hers. It wasn't cruelty. It was the geography of power. Dr. Ana Paula opened a folder. "We've received some reports about the need to improve humanized care, especially regarding respect for the dignity of all hospital users." Lucia looked at Cesar and saw the frightened boy behind the arrogance. How many Cesar had she encountered in her life? Men who mistook privilege for competence, who thought a diploma was a license to disrespect. She thought of her mother, Teresa, who always said, "Daughter, when you get up there, don't forget to extend your hand to those coming up, but also don't forget to teach that respect isn't a favor, it's a right." This was not a time for revenge. It was a time for transformation. "Dr. Cesar," Lucia said, her voice as calm as a lake on a windless morning. "This hospital was built with the sweat of my family. My father carried the bricks that make up these walls. My mother cleaned these corridors for years." She paused, letting the words settle in the air like golden dust. "And today, I set the rules that govern this place. The first rule is simple. Dignity is non-negotiable." Cesar lowered his eyes. For the first time in years, perhaps decades, he saw himself as he truly was. Small in the face of something much greater than his diploma and his arrogance. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was transformative, as if the hospital walls themselves were learning a new language, one where respect was the only accepted currency. Share if you also believe that respect has no color, no social class, no borders. Sometimes you need to occupy spaces to change mindsets. 3 hours later, Lucia descended into the hospital's main lobby. Her footsteps echoed softly against the marble floor, reflecting the golden light of the late afternoon. She stopped before the mural at the entrance, a sterile white wall where only the name Hospital San Vicente appeared in cold silver letters. She held a small bronze plaque in her hands. The metal, warmed by the sun from her office window, still radiated heat against her fingers. On the polished surface, engraved with the elegance that only truth possesses, the words shone like promises fulfilled. A black girl of about 8 years old watched from afar, sitting on her mother's lap in the waiting room. Her large eyes followed Lucia's every move with the pure curiosity of childhood. Some staff members approached discreetly. Nurse Patricia was among them, but her expression was different now, no longer disdainful, just the embarrassment of someone caught red-handed. Dr. Felipe and Dr. Amanda watched from afar, like someone attending a ceremony they weren't invited to attend. Security guard Ronaldo approached, but this time not to question, to help. He held a small drill in his hands, ready to attach the sign to the wall. "A director," he said, his voice thick with pride that wasn't just professional, it was ancestral. "Where do you want me to put it?" Lucia smiled. It was the same smile Grandma Conceição would have given if she could have seen that moment. As Ronaldo affixed the plaque to the wall, Lucia felt the weight of all generations transform into lightness. It wasn't the weight of a burden. It was the weight of wings finally able to unfold. He thought of his father, Antonio, who carried bricks dreaming of daughters becoming architects. His mother, Teresa, who cleaned offices imagining her granddaughters as executives. His grandmother, Conceição, who never learned to read but memorized all the prayers for her grandchildren to study. Every humiliation they'd swallowed, every dream postponed, every no they'd turned into fuel. It had all led to this, to that sign, to that moment. The 8-year-old girl pulled away from her mother's lap and approached slowly. She stopped in front of the newly installed plaque, trying to decipher the words engraved in bronze. Dona Teresa Silva Community Hospital, in honor of those who cleaned so that others might shine. "Auntie," she asked, looking at Lucia with that pure curiosity of children, "is this Dona Teresa your mother?" Lucia knelt down until she was level with the girl. Their eyes met at the same level. 2 generations recognizing each other. "Yes, my daughter. And now this place bears her name forever." The girl smiled and touched the plate with her fingertips. "It's all ours then," he said, with the unconscious wisdom of childhood. Lucia hugged the girl and whispered in her ear the same words her grandmother Conceição had whispered to her as a child. "It's all ours, daughter. It always has been. We've just been waiting for the right moment to remind the world of that." If this story touched your heart, please like and subscribe to the channel, because the fight continues and it needs to be told, one story at a time. Every like, every share is a brick in the construction of a more just world.